In the winter of 2018, a restoration team working inside Salem's oldest meeting house found something they were never meant to see. Hidden beneath a warped floorboard, sealed away by time, dust, and guilt, was a leather-bound record book, its pages eaten by age and something darker. The writing inside was faded, written in careful black ink that had bled through the parchment like dried blood. What began as a church ledger soon revealed itself as something far more sinister, a private record of disappearances, executions, and stolen legacies. At first glance, it seemed to belong to Salem's Puritan era, a time already infamous for its witch trials, but what the restorers uncovered went beyond superstition. Each page detailed the names of men and women history had forgotten. Over 200 names, beside each one a date, a property valuation, and a phrase that seemed both administrative and ominous. According to official history, 19 souls were executed for witchcraft in 1692. But this record suggested a different number, 237, and every missing name, every erased life, circled back to a single lineage, the Blackwells, 3 brothers, 3 positions of power. One legacy of terror. Judge Ezekiel Blackwell, stern and commanding, ruled the Salem courts with iron precision. His judgments were absolute, and his word carried the weight of Scripture. Reverend Nathaniel Blackwell, his younger brother, delivered sermons that could shake a man's faith from his bones. His voice, a fire that promised salvation through fear, burned through the hearts of his congregation. And Sheriff Josiah Blackwell, the youngest, was their enforcer. He carried a walking stick carved with strange symbols, said to have broken more bones than any other weapon in Essex County. Together, these men ruled Salem not by faith, but by fear. From their stately home across the meeting house, the only one in the settlement with glass windows that caught the light like mirrors, they watched the town below, farmers, merchants, widows, even ministers. No one escaped their gaze. To the outside world, they were pillars of purity, but behind the oak doors of the Blackwell house, the truth was darker than any sermon. When the harsh winter of 1691 arrived, it brought with it famine, sickness, and desperation. Families huddled in candlelight, praying that spring would come before hunger took them. It was in this desperate stillness that whispers began to spread, of witchcraft, of neighbors seen walking in the woods at night, of livestock dying without cause. And when the first accusation came, the Blackwell brothers were ready. They had been waiting for it. The first woman named was Widow Porter, a stubborn landowner who refused to sell her riverside property to Judge Ezekiel. When she was dragged from her home on a cold February night, the villagers believed they were purging evil from their midst. What they did not know was that the widow's land was the key to the Blackwell family's expansion, the river access Ezekiel had coveted for months. Her arrest was not divine justice, it was acquisition. Inside the Blackwell household, the men celebrated quietly that night, their laughter echoing down the narrow halls. But someone heard them, someone who should never have known their secret. Her name was Mercy Blackwell. Mercy was the judge's daughter and the reverend's ward, a young woman of 16 with copper hair and eyes like a gathering storm. She had been raised among scripture and silence, trained to write the church records in her uncle Nathaniel's study. Her handwriting was neat, her loyalty unquestioned, until that winter. She had begun to notice strange things, duplicate records, missing pages, private meetings held after midnight. And once, she saw her father's seal pressed into the wax of a document that bore another man's name. The next day, that man was gone. Then came the night she overheard them. As she carried firewood to her uncle's study, she heard Ezekiel's voice, sharp and urgent. "The widow's land adjoins the river access we need," he said. With her husband gone, she'll never manage it. She refused to sell twice. Josiah's voice followed, lower and colder. Perhaps she'll soon face troubles of a different nature. Nathaniel's reply was like the sound of frost cracking. Indeed, The devil finds his way into idle hearts. Their laughter, dark and knowing, froze her in place. 2 weeks later, the widow was chained and accused of witchcraft. The trials began in earnest soon after. What started with 3 accused grew into dozens. The meeting house became a stage for hysteria. Young girls convulsing, mothers weeping, ministers shouting prayers, while the accused were silenced beneath their words. Judge Ezekiel presided with unflinching calm. Reverend Nathaniel thundered from the pulpit about sin and salvation. Sheriff Josiah made his rounds through the village at night, dragging the accused from their beds, his boots echoing against the cobblestones like a drumbeat of judgment. And Mercy wrote it all down. She copied the official records for the church, and when no one watched, she copied the hidden ones, the private entries her uncle ordered her to make in a smaller, locked ledger. But she was curious. One night, she stole a glance at what she was writing. The first thing she noticed was a pattern. Every name in that secret book belonged to someone who owned property near the Blackwell holdings. Every death or disappearance came with a transaction. Land, mills, livestock, all transferred quietly to the Blackwells or their associates. That night, Mercy couldn't sleep. She crept into her father's study and found the locked drawer. The key she had made, an imperfect copy carved from candle wax and pewter, fit the lock with a soft click. Inside lay the ledger she had seen, its pages filled with neat, merciless handwriting. The ink shimmered faintly under candlelight, as if the words themselves were alive. The entries were chilling in their precision. Goody Osborne confession secured, execution public, widow Porter matter concluded, property reassigned, Thomas Putnam disposal complete, compensation arranged. Beside every name was the same mark, E, B, N, B, or J. B, the initials of the Blackwell brothers. Mercy turned the pages faster, her breath quickening. The list went on, longer than she could have imagined. Names she had never heard in church or court. People who had never been accused publicly. And beside many of them, 2 words that chilled her blood: private execution. That was when she understood the witch trials were not about faith. They were about ownership, and her family were not saviors. They were executioners hiding behind the cross. Outside, the church bells tolled midnight. Inside, Mercy clutched the ledger, her hands shaking. She could almost hear the voices of those names calling from beneath the floorboards, the same voices that, centuries later, would echo again when the ledger was found. But in that moment, in the flicker of her candlelight, she made a silent vow. She would expose them. She replaced the ledger, locked the drawer, and slipped back into her room. Beneath a loose plank in the floor, she hid a small scrap of parchment, her first piece of evidence. Her handwriting trembled, but the words were clear. The Blackwell brothers are killing for land. God forgive us all. What Mercy did not know was that her secret act had not gone unnoticed. From the shadows at the end of the corridor, a figure had been watching, one who would later decide her fate. And though history would record the Salem trials as hysteria, the truth slept beneath its surface, synced in a hidden book, sealed under a church floor, waiting 3 centuries to be found. By the time spring crept across Massachusetts Bay Colony, the air in Salem carried more than the scent of thawing earth. It carried suspicion, an invisible fog that slipped under every door and sat heavy on every tongue. The trials had become a fever that fed upon itself. Each new confession demanded another, and each name whispered under duress became the noose for someone else. From dawn until well past the toll of the evening bell, Judge Ezekiel Blackwell sat in the meeting house chamber, his quill scratching like an executioner's blade. To the onlookers he was calm, almost saintly, a man burdened by the duty of purging evil. Only Mercy saw the calculation behind his eyes, the cold arithmetic of gain and loss. Each verdict meant another parcel of land, another ledger entry, another acquisition complete. Reverend Nathaniel turned scripture into weaponry. His sermons thundered that Satan walked among them wearing familiar faces. Men left those services trembling, convinced that virtue demanded denunciation. The Reverend called it cleansing. Mercy knew it for what it was, control. And Sheriff Josiah, ever the blunt instrument, turned those words into flesh and pain. When prisoners refused to confess, his walking stick delivered theology in splintered bone. No one questioned his methods. The screams were proof enough for those who already believed. Mercy lived within this trinity of fear like a ghost among the living. By daylight she copied baptismal records, births and marriages meant to give the illusion of a pious community. At night she wrote her own secret chronicle, dates, names, property deeds, each line a silent rebellion. Beneath her mattress the pages multiplied, thin leaves of treason rustling whenever she moved. She tried to keep her face still during family prayers. When her father's voice rose in pious cadence, she bowed her head and murmured "Amen," even as nausea twisted her stomach. Every meal felt like theater, Nathaniel blessing the bread, Ezekiel quoting proverbs about justice, Josiah grinning faintly as though the words were an inside joke. Sometimes Mercy wondered whether any of them still believed in God, or if the church had become merely another courtroom where they stood as both judge and deity. Rumors began to coil around the Blackwell name. The richer families of Salem, the Proctors, the Putnams, whispered that too many widows' estates found their way into Ezekiel's hands. Yet no one dared confront them openly. The brothers held the town's fear like reins, and fear was a stronger defense than soldiers. One humid evening in May, Mercy heard hoofbeats stop outside the house. She peered from her attic window and saw her cousin William, Sheriff Josiah's only son, dismounting, face pale beneath the lantern glow. He had always been kind to her, awkward in the solemn Blackwell household, more interested in books than in power. But tonight something haunted his eyes. When he looked up, he saw her watching. His mouth formed a single word, talk. Later, in the dark corridor between the kitchen and storeroom, William whispered what he had seen. They took Goodman Putnam to the cellar. Father said he was consorting with Goody Proctor, but Mercy, he hesitated. He wasn't questioned, he was beaten until he signed something. Mercy felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. A confession, William nodded, a deed. That night, when the household finally slept, Mercy crept toward the meeting house cellar. She followed the scent of smoke and copper that lingered like breath after violence. The door was unbarred, a careless Mercy. Inside, lantern light trembled across damp walls. On a rough table lay tools that did not belong to any church. Iron clamps, ropes stiff with dried blood, a bucket darkened with rust. Beside them sat a small book. Not the great ledger she had seen before, but a thinner volume, one she recognized instantly as her own handwriting. Her uncle had found the church's duplicate record book and replaced pages with new ones forged in her style. Her neat letters now justified deaths she had never recorded. They are using my hand to damn them all, she thought. She stumbled back, heart hammering. A floorboard creaked above her. Someone descending the stairs. She blew out the lantern and pressed herself into shadow. Through the sliver of moonlight from the open door, she saw boots, polished and heavy, stop at the threshold. Josiah's voice drifted down, calm and deliberate. Best not wander alone after dark, niece. The devil loves curious souls. She held her breath until the door shut and his steps faded. Only then did she flee into the night, crossing the churchyard where the graves seemed to lean toward her like silent witnesses. The following days blurred into dread. Every knock at the door made her flinch. The trials intensified. Wagons carried new prisoners daily. When one of the accused, Rachel Nurse, escaped from the jail, Josiah announced it from the pulpit. But Mercy had seen the entry in the ledger 2 nights earlier. Resistant to questioning, disposed of, swamp burial. She could almost feel the bog water closing over the woman's face. By midsummer, the air itself felt diseased. Flies gathered on windowsills of empty houses whose owners had fled the colony. The town's wealth flowed like a river into Blackwell coffers. Yet beneath their triumph, cracks formed. Letters arrived from Boston. Governor Phipps questioning the use of spectral evidence. Ministers who once supported the trials began to speak of moderation. Ezekiel's replies grew sharper, his temper frayed. Mercy saw opportunity in that tension. She began copying pages from the ledger, one each night, hiding them under the stable floor. She planned to send them to Boston by messenger when the harvest wagons traveled north. But secrecy, like rot, spreads quickly. One afternoon, as she pressed a copied page between the slats, she felt eyes on her. William stood in the doorway, a basket of feed in his hands. For a heartbeat they stared at each other, silence thick with all that could not be unsaid. Then he spoke quietly, "If they find that, they'll hang you." "If no one finds it," she replied, "they'll hang everyone else." To her surprise, he didn't report her. Instead, he began to help, small gestures at first, a warning when his father's men planned a search, a key left accidentally. Near her door, in the dim corners of the Blackwell estate, alliance bloomed like mold, secret, necessary, and doomed. Late in September, William told her of a meeting to be held in Ezekiel's study. "They call it the final acquisition," he whispered. "If we listen, we'll know everything." That night, they hid behind a panel in the storage closet adjoining the study. Through the thin boards, voices bled like poison through cloth. Ezekiel's tone was sharp with urgency. "Governor Phipps will curb the trials. We finish before his return." Nathaniel's reply, colder than the wind outside, 17 families in 3 weeks. "Even with our efficiency, that is bold." Josiah answered, "Then we'll dispense with public formality. The swamp has room enough." Mercy's stomach turned. This was no longer opportunism, it was massacre. She looked at William, whose hands trembled as he listened. For the first time, she saw that he feared his father not as a tyrant but as something unhuman. When the meeting ended, they crept into the night and plotted escape. William would create a diversion, draw his father's men north. Mercy would carry the copied pages south to Boston and deliver them to the governor himself. It was a plan born of desperation and faith in justice, to fragile things in Salem. The next evening the alarm bells rang exactly as they had planned. Smoke rose beyond the tree line, the false fire William had promised. Mercy seized her satchel, documents sewn into the lining of her cloak, and slipped toward the back door. But before her hand touched the latch, heavy boots thundered on the porch. The door burst open. Josiah stood framed against the flicker of torchlight, deputies at his back, and her father's face cold as stone beside him. "Mercy Blackwell," Ezekiel intoned, "you are charged with witchcraft and conspiracy against godly authority." The words struck like an axe. The world tilted, the betrayal too sudden for breath. "How?" she began, but Josiah cut her off, lifting the torn lining of her cloak. Pages spilled to the floor like feathers of a slain bird. Ezekiel's voice held no anger, only weariness. "Did you think the devil would not betray his own?" Behind him, a figure moved from the shadows, William. His eyes glistened with tears, yet his hands were steady as he handed over the remaining pages. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "They said they'd spare you." Mercy understood then what every condemned soul must feel in the instant before the rope tightens. The betrayal not of strangers, but of blood. They dragged her through the corridor, past the family portraits whose painted eyes seemed to watch with detached amusement, and down into the root cellar. The air grew colder, the smell of earth and old iron closing around her. The torchlight revealed stains on the walls, dark blooms that no scrubbing had erased. Ezekiel set the ledger on a table before her, its pages fluttering like wings. "This book is our covenant," he said. "Through it we cleanse the land of corruption. Through it our name endures." Mercy lifted her chin despite the ropes biting into her wrists. "Through it you murder innocence." Nathaniel's gaze was pitying. "Innocence is a luxury of those who have never ruled." Josiah stepped forward with his walking Stick, the carved symbols catching the light. Confess, child, name the ones who tempted you, name your accomplices. She said nothing. The stick struck her ribs, pain blossomed white. She gasped but did not cry out. Another blow, then another. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled. The first storm of October breaking over Salem. When consciousness slipped, she dreamed of the ledger's pages turning endlessly, her name already written there, waiting for the final notation, family matter resolved. The storm rose from the coast like an old god reclaiming its breath. Wind clawed at the shutters of the meeting house, rain lashed the cobblestones, and the bell in the belfry tolled without hands to move it. Down in the root cellar, Mercy Blackwell hung between waking and oblivion, her wrists raw where the rope bit into them. Every thunderclap seemed to echo through her bones. When she opened her eyes, she saw only the lantern, its flame guttering in the draught from the stairwell, and the silhouette of her father seated at the table. The ledger lay open before him. He dipped his quill with deliberate care, as though the world above were not collapsing into tempest. The record must be complete, he murmured. Even the storm bears witness. Mercy's throat burned. You mean to write my death as another transaction? Ezekiel didn't answer. He drew a line across the parchment and spoke as he wrote. Mercy Blackwell. Disposition private. Property retained within family. Lightning burst through the cracks in the door, white and merciless. For an instant she saw his face, calm, almost tender, the way a priest might look at a sacrificial lamb. Then the latch above slammed open. Reverend Nathaniel descended 2 steps, breathless. Governor Phipps has arrived from Boston. He brings soldiers. He demands to see the prisoners. The judge's quill froze mid-stroke. Outside, thunder answered. Then we finish this now, Ezekiel said. No witnesses. Josiah appeared behind the reverend, his stick glinting. The swamp will swallow her before dawn. Mercy's heart pounded. She strained against the ropes until the fibers cut her skin. Somewhere inside that pain, a voice, her mother's, faint but steady, rose from memory. When the righteous are silent, the stones will speak. She began to speak, not prayers, not pleas. Names, one by one, she recited every victim recorded in the hidden ledger. Each name fell like a curse. With every syllable the brothers flinched, as though the dead themselves pressed close to listen. When she reached the widow porter, the lantern flickered and went out. The cellar plunged into darkness. In that blackness, something moved. A whisper of footsteps not belonging to any living man. The ropes at Mercy's wrists slackened. She didn't question it. She ran. She ran. Up the narrow stone stairs, her breath ragged. The rope ends still dragging from her wrists. Lightning flashed through the cracks around the cellar door, showing the meeting house above like a fleeting photograph. Pews overturned, hymn books scattered by the wind that howled through broken glass. She pushed through the heavy door and stumbled into the main hall. Rain poured through a gap in the roof, pattering on the wood floor like thousands of tiny drums. Every window blazed white for an instant as another lightning bolt tore open the sky. Somewhere outside, men were shouting. She recognized William's voice among them, urgent, terrified. Governor's riders, she thought. They've come early. Behind her, boots thundered on the cellar stairs. Josiah's roar rose above the storm. Seize her, she's bewitched the ropes. Mercy darted toward the side door, slipping on the wet boards. She crashed through into the graveyard. The rain hit her face like stones. The air smelled of earth and iron. She could barely see more than the white flashes that marked each headstone, but she knew this ground. She had walked it every Sunday of her life. Between the graves she saw movement, soldiers in mud, streaked coats, torches sputtering in the downpour. A tall man in a tricorn hat, Governor Phipps himself, was shouting orders. When he caught sight of her, he raised a hand. Hold, who goes there? Before she could answer, Josiah burst from the doorway behind her, walking stick raised like a sword. The witch, he bellowed. She's cursed the town. Mercy stumbled toward the governor, clutching the torn pages from her cloak. Not witchcraft proof, she gasped. They murdered them all. The ledger, Under the church floor, the wind snatched her words. Yet something in her face, some truth that fear could not imitate, made the governor hesitate. He gestured to his men, "Search the cellar, bring that book." Josiah lunged, but the soldiers were quicker. 2 muskets leveled, the sheriff froze, snarling. For the first time, Mercy saw uncertainty in his eyes. Ezekiel appeared in the doorway, his robes soaked, his expression carved from stone. "Governor Phipps," he said evenly, "you trespass on a holy investigation. This girl is possessed. Her words are poison." The governor looked from the judge to the trembling girl before him. Then another voice cut through the storm, hoarse, desperate. "William, she speaks the truth. The ledger exists. I've seen it." The brothers turned as one. In that instant, the mask of godly composure shattered. Fury twisted Ezekiel's face. "You ungrateful wretch," he hissed. "You would damn your own blood. Want me to keep going from here, Janny?" Next part picks up with the soldiers opening the floorboards and the final confrontation in the storm. The soldiers tore up the meeting house floor. Thunder rolled above them, as if the heavens themselves demanded to see what had been hidden. The boards came away in splinters. Beneath them lay the damp earth of 2 centuries' worth of graves, and the ledger, wrapped in oil, cloth, and sealed with wax, that bore the Blackwell crest. Governor Phipps bent to lift it. The moment his hand touched the cover, a gust swept through the hall and every candle guttered out. Someone muttered a prayer. When the lanterns flared again, the brothers stood motionless, eyes fixed on the book as though it were alive. "Read it," Mercy said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Phipps opened the ledger. Ink glistened in neat black lines, undimmed by time or moisture. As the pages turned, the list of names unrolled like a burial shroud. For each name, a notation: execution, seizure, acquisition complete. The governor's face drained of color. "By God," he whispered, "this is no witch hunt. This is theft and murder under holy seal." Ezekiel lunged for the book, shouting that the devil forged it, but the soldiers caught his arms. Nathaniel fell to his knees, muttering scripture until his words collapsed into nonsense. Josiah tried to flee through the graveyard gate, only to be struck down by lightning that split the sky and hurled him into the mud. When the flash faded, his body lay still, smoke rising from his coat. Rain poured through the broken roof. The governor signaled to his men, "Arrest them both," he said. "This ends tonight." Mercy sank to her knees. The storm roared around her, yet for the first time since her mother's death she felt a strange peace. She had done what she could. The truth was no longer buried. But history is never content with revelation alone. As the soldiers led the surviving brothers away, Ezekiel turned once more toward her. "Blood binds tighter than truth," he said softly. "You cannot wash us out of Salem. We are the land."